Hey folks, this week on Basement Banter, Rory and I interview GM Murray from Perth, Australia, new GM for Game Shop's Basement. So this is your chance to kind of get to know him and what he's about and stuff. And we'll be advertising games with him like super soon, probably this week in just a few days. Um, and it's pretty exciting. So that's what's up for this week on Basement Banter.
So Murray, can you kind of tell the folks listening in, how did you get into RPGs and gaming in general? I mean, what were your experiences of gaming like? Because we all,
Ooh,
it's kind of
that's
similar,
good.
but we all have a story of how we got into it.
Well, not surprisingly, it all started with the game shop. Way
Like
back
it.
in the
So,
70s, there was a guy in Perth whose father had been a miniature gamer who got tired of selling games out of his VW bus. So he started a store called Simulations in the Central Business District, dilapidated mall, which he could get cheaply. Now, I first met this guy, Doug Thorpe, and the store this way. He would go out to libraries. He would run wargaming and gaming demonstrations. Now, I actually missed the one at my local library. And I thought, no, I was 15 at the time. So I kept my ear open, eyes open. And wouldn't you know, Christmas time, there was a big article in the local paper in talking about Doug and all these wonderful games he sold at this place. I thought, I've got to get there, but I wonder how I can do it. Then, in something could only happen in the 70s, he used to hire out the Perth City Town Hall for things called games orgies, which were
well,
weekend of wargaming at the most central spot in the city at the time. Perth was still just really a large country town turning into a small city. So I was a lonely 15-year-old boy. I didn't really get along with my peers. A lot of stuff. I was sort of interested in science fiction and fantasy. And being born in '63, I was born, not 20 years after the war. So World War II was interesting because I thought, I'll go have a look at this wargaming. And I liked it, liked the counter games. And I started going to the store, but there was no one to play with. Anyway, two years later, in my senior high school year, Doug moved it to an area where he could have a storeroom and he could play games in store. Now, you've got to understand, Perth was that provincial back then that trading in the centre of the city stopped at 12 noon or 1 p.m. on Saturday. Nothing was open Sunday. Well, Doug had to pay for somebody to be in Saturday, so he said, Dave, why don't you just let customers stay after closing and play on the shop floor, war games? And I went there, and then some of the guys just slightly younger than me bought this thing called D&D and Traveller, the role-play game. So, there were not a lot of people wanting to play war games, and I was a bit of a loner. So they invited me to join. So the first game I ever played was Traveller. And then we played a bit more, but it was never really my thing. Then I went to university and met a guy called Michael Pritchard who could do 4-digit multiplication in his head. So he was destined to get his maths degree. He never did. Why? Because his parents bought him the red starter box. And we would go every day of the week to this new university, Murdoch University, and I would study history, and we thought Michael was studying maths and other people would do stuff, and he would run a game, but we would leave and go to class. Michael didn't leave and go to class. Michael ran a D&D campaign extrapolating from the red box to level, I think he got 50, 5 days a week for an entire semester, and he was there at 9 and left at 5 to get the bus home. So not surprisingly, the man who could do 4-digit multiplication in his head failed maths, but then got a job for life for the government. So go figure. But it was non-stop D&D. I already knew a little bit, so, to me it wasn't that hard. Also, it helped that I got on with the people at the table because we were loners. We were different from the average uni student. I mean, I didn't drink for various reasons. Michael didn't drink. He also had some health issues, and the others were loners. But we understood D&D, and therefore we weren't alone at uni anymore. If you know what I mean. Then you get connected to other things. I got connected to other groups. Why? Because I went to that store, Simulations, and I met gamers, and we went and played games, roleplay games, and like the game shop's basement, John's been telling me about. I met connections with people interested in the same thing as me. In fact, I would venture to suggest most people I met in gaming have been through either the club I was in at uni or stores. So to me, store community is wonderful. Now you're not so isolated because we have options like online gaming and Discord. Connects everyone anywhere in the world, different time zones. But back then, Perth was the most isolated capital city on the planet. It still is in many ways. That's why we've survived COVID, because it's so difficult to get here, and we put up the walls again like we did with the influenza epidemic. And like then, we've had very few casualties. But once you're in Perth, it's very hard to go anywhere. To give our US friends a bit of a rough geography lesson, American sailors coming to Perth and Americans I've met have said Perth reminds them of San Diego in climate and sort of activities, except it does not have LA or San Fran above it. In fact, the nearest city for most of my life to Perth was Adelaide, which, to give you a comparison, is roughly we're talking about. So imagine there's only San Diego on the west coast of the entire lower 48, and the next city is Vicksburg on the Mississippi. That's how far we're talking. So I was so glad to find gaming, because there was no other way to connect with other people unless you travelled to the eastern states. Sydney is Sydney and Perth are roughly the same distance as from the west coast to the east coast of the US. And that's usually what it would have meant if you wanted to get in the gaming scene, travel to the southeast to go to Melbourne or Canberra or Sydney. So being in Perth, there were a few of us, but we were dedicated, and we played quite a few different games. Not all the games, for instance, played in the US and Melbourne, because it just wasn't the base, but we got into games and played a variety through the 80s and 90s. How did you guys find it? I mean, I know that Rory started later, but John, you must have started about the same time as me. I was 16 in 79. So when did you start? Early 80s?
What I'm thinking here, 82, what I'm thinking here is I'm going to have to eat my words, because I almost feel like I owe you an apology, because I just made an assumption that, gamers all have similar stories. No, I've never heard a story like yours. And I'm going to eat a slice of humble pie along with my words, because I'm not going to, I usually, for humorous effect, I talk about growing up in Nebraska. I will never think about growing up in Nebraska the same again. It's I think I told my stock joke that I've had for years and years last week, that in the 80s us Nebraska kids could identify when Stephen King came out with his Children of the Corn movies, because we knew that there were little towns out in Nebraska that could disappear and no one would ever know. We lived in one. So that was so it's like, it's amazing that gaming got you at all. Now, I'm not going to say it the other way around, that you got into gaming, because I was trying to pinpoint it earlier, because somebody was asking me about and I was thinking, Murray's been a player at Game Shop's Basement almost from the beginning, and we're 9 months old. So it's been either 8 or 9 months. It was either that first or second month. And last week I kind of gushed about you. And so I'm like, so it's not that, it's, lucky you got into gaming at all. No, I'm thinking it's lucky that gaming got you. So, yeah,
In my immature years, thousands would have had a different opinion, but I was immature. That makes sense. Like all males who think they're normal but are isolated in their 20s, I was a P dash. Well, put it this way, Rick with the silent P. I'm afraid.
Fair enough. Well, but yeah, no, it was 1982. I was 11 years old, and there was a kid at school who had the red box set, and talking about things that wouldn't happen now. You were talking about gaming orgies in the 70s that wouldn't happen now. Well, maybe the same events could happen now, but you'd have to name them something different. You couldn't use the word orgy.
Oh, yeah.
But something that happened in the early 80s that wouldn't happen now was I was 11 years old. I was in 5th grade, and elementary school pretty much shut down for like 2 weeks because for the Christmas play. Basically, we elementary school kids, we would rehearse the Christmas play, go through it all from beginning to end before lunch. Then we'd have lunch, and then we'd go through the Christmas play again that afternoon. And that was what we did every day of school for 2 weeks. So there was no geography, there was no math, there was no science, there was no reading or spelling. Basically our whole schedule was to go through the Christmas play twice. Once before lunch, once after lunch, and that could happen in Nebraska in 1982, but it probably wouldn't happen in America today. But anyway, so I was the 5th grade class. In these Christmas plays, they were kind of a rote formula where each class would come up and sing a song and then leave. And maybe the 1st graders would be the toys, and the 2nd graders would be the reindeer, and the 3rd graders would be the elves, or whatever. Well, in that particular Christmas play, I remember the 5th graders were the Christmas angels. And so basically there was a lot of sitting around waiting for your class's turn to come sing their song. And so the lot of sitting around. Well, we were encouraged to bring books or something to do. And so the kid sitting in front of me brought his D&D red box set. I was 11 years old and in 5th grade. And he had a piece of graph paper. He had a dungeon that he'd drawn out. I remember that I saw in the book that you could be a magic user. They called it a magic user back then, and I really wanted to be one. But he wouldn't let me because he said the rules were too hard and he didn't understand them because we were 5th graders. So I had to be a fighter. So I remember my fighter's name was Zero, Zerro. And he died because he fell into a pit of green slime. but
oh, well, that's better than my first D&D character. Oh, God.
And but so I begged my parents, for it. So at Christmas, which was just a few weeks later, because I was just exposed to it at the Christmas program, on Christmas Day, 1982, there it was under the Christmas tree, the red basic box set. So before the first few weeks of Game Shop's Basement, before the light bulb went on and I figured out a brand name and that we were going to be Game Shop's Basement, I just had a logo for the first couple weeks that said John Clement, Professional Game Master, and then I thought it would be cute. I had established 1982 at the bottom because that was when I got my red box set, established 1982. But yeah, that was so. I did once. I was doing Game Shop's Basement. I did call my mom. I did say, "Hey, Mom, I'm making money at this thing now. It only took 39 years."
Mine's gone beyond, so it's like too late for me. But sometimes I'm just going, yeah. See, it did get me somewhere. Got me friends. It's getting me money now. It took a while. But
well, yeah, the technology. Yeah, the technology kind of had to be in place.
Yeah, so, true.
If too much technology is in place, then they won't need us as GMs because people will just jack into the Matrix and then they'll be able to experience D&D that way. They won't need us human storytellers anymore.
Oh, it's an interesting argument about design space, but that's a side topic we can talk about all day. It's mistakes made in the 70s they'd moved away from, which, funnily enough, now if had technology they could actually pull off. But
right. So Okay, so how would you describe your DMing style? Because I know that's what a lot of people that I want to know about. There's like, oh, John's got a second DM, but every DM is different. So what's he like? So,
Yeah.
so how would you describe your DMing style?
Laid back, but rules based. A lot of people go story trump rules, and I'm sort of like that. However, for me, you're running a world, right? And as I was explaining to some people tonight, because I was running basically DM's Academy, the core things for designing a world in D&D is the 3 core books and your campaign world book define reality. That is how reality works. So just ditching the rules is fine if you want to run a freefall or a LARP, but it makes no sense if you're trying to run a tabletop RPG, virtually or otherwise.
Exactly. And so with that story trumps rules thing, but you still have to be rules based. Best illustration of that I ever heard. This is one of my quicker stories, I promise. I was in college, and there was some player who needed me to make a judgment call about something. I was kind of taking my time and thinking about it deeply, and she was a little bit impatient at first, but then she chilled out when I explained. But she's like, "Well, what's taking so long?" And I calmly explained to her that well, see, in the league, and she was a pre-law student, so she got it too. In the legal world, there's this thing called precedent. It's like, if I make this judgment call this way now, it may have unintended consequences. I would like to run a rules consistent world where even my table rules are consistent.
Yes.
If I am making a table rule because I think story trumps rules as written, then I need my table rules to be logical and consistent and carry on in the future. So if I make this ruling this way today, I would like for us to all know at the table that that's how it works, and that's how it'll work next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So I said, I could just come up with a ruling to fix our situation now. But what I'm doing is I'm projecting into the future to think about unintended consequences and what this really means for the world. And she just got it like that. And she was like, oh, well, in that case, take your time.
It is an important thing. I was talking to my fellow GMs today, or budding GM, about this. It's like 1/4 of people are roughly what has been described as melancholies, which means they like detail. They like rules because that gives them certainty. So if you keep changing things on the fly, or don't explain why, or worse still, throw a clue where reality is warped, then they'll become uncertain, and I wouldn't say afraid, but they'll demand rules consistency. I just find it's easy for me as a DM to be certain to go, okay, I have a certain understanding of the rules. We all share it. We can all have certainty. The melancholy in me is happy. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not a rules lawyer. It's because I'm mature and I no longer believe in the melancholy's myth of perfectionism. That's the curse we invent. Well, 1/4 of the population uses the horsewhip themselves and excuse poor performance, and you know. Anyway, I'm digressing again. Please keep me on track, moderator.
It's okay. So that's a little bit about your DMing style. Another thing that is good for people to get to know DMs is because people ask me sometimes, when you do get a chance to be a player, what kinds of characters do you like to play, and how do you approach playing as opposed to DMing?
Okay. The secret is I've changed over the years. Call it maturity. But I now play the characters I would like people to see. See, I start by teaching new people D&D by going, D&D is a team game. Yeah, you can start as the disaffected loner, but you can't stay that way. If you do, there isn't a place for you at this table. So, I also believe in rewarding or fostering people who drive the story. Not necessarily by doing wonderful role play of drunkard, but taking actions and initiative to help the group advance the story. So if I'm going to have those as standards for players, I have it now for me as a character. I tend to play glue characters, help glue the group together and keep them going, or out-and-out leaders. I take charge. Really, it's something I personally am not suited to, but because I hold those positions and I believe in them about what D&D is, then there's standards that apply to me. So I play those characters.
Meshes with what I've seen because I've been dealing with for you for months. Yeah, absolutely.
How about you, John? What do you play and why?
Elves.
And magic users. But besides that.
Well, we all play for different reasons. Like a guy who used to be a really good friend of mine described once that like we get the dopamine hits in our brain, or like you were talking about different personality types. So the reason why these games have such broad appeal is they've got something for everybody. I remember growing up, I knew I was going to be a writer of some kind. And so in the early 80s, I saw I was still in elementary school, and I saw an interview with Steven Spielberg back then. And somebody asked Steven Spielberg what his formula was for these big blockbuster movies and everything. And he said buckshot. So that's it. That's the secret. Buckshot was like a shotgun with scatter shot.
Yep.
You make sure that there's something in the movie that's going to hit the whole audience. He said, make sure there's some romance for the people that want that, action for the people who want that, something silly and fun for the children who want to laugh, something silly and fun, but is older for the older crowd that still wants to laugh. Something maybe nostalgic and funny that calls back things. So he says that's the answer is buckshot. Make sure that there's something in there that scatter shot will hit the whole audience. And that affected me in the way I write D&D stories, in the way I write some of the books I published, in the way I write some of the short story, everything. It affected me as a teacher in the classroom, because it fits into learning theory and pedagogy, that you want to make sure that you're reaching the different learning styles. You're not just teaching to one narrow learning style. It's not my idea. It came from Steven Spielberg. Buckshot. That's the answer. It hit everyone. And I think in advance about what do I have in my formula that could hit everyone. But we all play differently. And I'm one of these people that I like to pretend that I'm really there. So what I'm doing now is I'm holding a sword, okay, in my imagination. I even catch myself doing that. So I like to pretend that if there was a multiverse and D&D was real out there and I was born in some other world, I would be like this elf. Elves just have the personality that seems to match mine in real life the closest. Yeah. But I've met other people over the years that always play halflings. Always, every single character is a halfling, or every single character is a dwarf, or every single character is a big bruiser fighter. I've met people before we got to computers and laptops and phones and everything. I had a guy at my table at home. He had a filing cabinet full of druids. Just druid. And so my older son, the gnome, every character he makes is a gnome, and I think about his personality and I'm like, you are a gnome. Oh my gosh, how did I have a gnome son? But
does he do gardening?
No, he's not that kind of gnome. I think he's a tinker gnome because he's a physics major and he wants to go into engineering.
That could be dangerous.
I think he's that kind of gnome. But yeah, so funny story about Mystara, our Mystara tables real quick. There is a gnome on Wednesdays. He's the gnome cleric of Odin. He's starting an orphanage. And just like human beings, we tend to make assumptions. And sometimes these assumptions, we try to avoid it. But even in D&D, we see how our human nature comes out when we make assumptions. So sometimes people will posit something to him, expecting him to come up with the nerdy answer because he's a gnome. And they think gnomes are tinkers and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm a forest gnome. Oh, sorry. I'm not that kind of gnome. You just assumed what kind of gnome I am.
Oh, dear.
But and because there are forest gnomes, but then there are like the intellectual tinker engineer gnomes. So, but anyway, the uh, but yeah, now that we've made now I've missed my chance because Rory was laughing over there and he was drinking. I missed my chance to make him spew out his nose. So maybe not this episode, but but why don't we have Rory ask Murray some questions?
Sure.
Actually, interesting point of view, Rory. We're like, they used to be called Groganards, except we're both bald and beardless. So we used to be called, if you follow Games Workshop, the beardy ones. You've just started. Do you feel yourself drawn to a particular role when you get into a group or a particular type of character?
Well, I find the first part of that question kind of interesting. It was interesting listening to you talk about how you kind of play the glue in groups and, you know, you just try and push the story forward. I kind of can't imagine playing with a group of people that don't all do that to some degree. And I've heard some stories, just speaking to John and other people, about certain characters that have a very lone wolf or self-interested kind of a role in a group. And to me, that's kind of the complete opposite reason to play D&D. I kind of would think that it's the crack and the fun that you have with the other group members. So you all need to kind of be on equal footing and equal interest in each other or in the group, rather than progressing your character almost against the group or out with the group. So that's definitely the reason I play is for the kind of teamwork element of it, or having fun with other people in this kind of world that's being built around you. Characters, as soon as I seen you could play a bard, I picked bard because I play music myself and have definitely lived that lifestyle of drinking in a pub and playing sessions. So I just felt drawn to that. But I think for my next character, I picked druid because like druids come from Irish mythology and Irish paganism, and I just find that aspect of D&D cool as well. That there's a lot of different European mythologies kind of interwoven in it, but that stuff definitely comes from the stuff that I've read about in Celtic mythology and things like that. So
that's an interesting question, if I may ask. I mean, my family moved from Scotland in 1913. They had earlier had ancestors who moved from Ireland in the 1880s. I've also got a bit of Prussian from the 1840s and a bit of French from somewhere. So to me, they're like, okay, they're part of, pardon the expression, Anglo-Celtic or Germanic culture, Western European culture, but I don't have a great feel for it. Where I've met people from Ulster who've said they've heard the Banshees wail and they've seen the road that comes off at an angle. You guys, do you really get a draw Irish people to the bard and the druid idea, or do you think they're just Wiccan or tasteless?
No, I definitely don't think those characters in D&D are you know, the kind of silly stereotype of leprechauns or whatever are probably bordering on tasteless. I certainly wouldn't get offended by a game or something like that. So, but the bars and druids thing, no, I don't think that's tasteless. I think kind of, I suppose it depends whatever way something's portrayed, but definitely so far the stuff that I've seen in D&D where you know, they've reused some of the old Irish pagan gods' Gaelic names as the name of the characters in D&D. You know, I just think that's cool that somebody's, you know, using that or drawing inspiration from it, so it kind of lives on. Yeah, I think that's certainly how we feel. Me and my missus and my mate, my missus is Scottish, but my mate's Irish. I mean, we just kind of think, cool, you know, we kind of drawn more to that. Like,
you part of the folk movement or the Gaelic movement, or
yeah,
you're more or less independent?
Yeah, would try and speak Gaelic like where we can in the house and with friends and things like that. So definitely try and keep it alive. And as I say, you know, just seeing bits of the you know, Celtic mythology and the folk tales that we were told when we were kids come up in D&D and place names and things like that is it's just really cool. You know,
Good stuff.
yeah. Just last week in our game with John on Saturday night, which we're to play later tonight to finish it off. John was kind of showing us the world of Mystara, like as zoomed out as you could get. And he was saying, well, this place is kind of roughly based on, the Arabian countries or things like that. And so I just said to him, well, where's Ireland or Scotland in the map? And he says, oh, well, it's here in Gallantry. So despite John, I think, probably haven't done, a good bit of prep work for where we were supposed to go on the next part of the story, both me and Owen just said, nope, we're going to Gallantry. We want to go to the Stara version of Scotland right now. So, yeah.
Good luck. Good luck. You're going to the worst place at all. Not only going to meet conceited Frenchmen, you're going to their homeland. Have fun. You've done that module. It's one of the greatest modules ever done. You're about to do.
Great. I was already looking forward to it tonight. So, but yeah.
Hopefully, I didn't drop some spoilers.
No.
It's good. It's good. So,
what was the next question?
So
yeah, I think it was Rory's. Go ahead.
Apart from like tabletop gaming, like what would your other hobbies or interests be?
Well, the interests have narrowed over the years. I mean, basically, other than see, this is the thing. I still don't fit. I come from working class stock. No real connection with working class culture. I've joined what sociologists euphemistically call the middling class. In other words, working class people that go to uni, or poor middle class people that go to uni, have poor jobs but want to live a life of luxury, plenty of leisure activities like the middle class. And it's like, this is no. You don't have the lifestyles for this, and you're... So I don't fit. So I actually don't have a lot of passions outside gaming, besides my wife. And I have to say that she's standing next to me, as she does, because behind every good man is a good woman who hasn't stabbed him through the heart. Nearly. So she's nearly done it, she said. But yeah, I'm got to the age now where the kids are off doing their own thing, so there's no grandkids to be interested in. It's like, so I'm devoting everything, focusing everything on business. Basically improve my income. And I figured I want to do something I'm passionate about. That's role-playing. I've been engaged in it for 40 years, off and on. Really get engaged in it. Spread my passion, share it with other people. Develop communities. Get a good buzz. I mean, you shouldn't really work your hobby, but at least working your hobby when you work with good people and good relationships. Again, because I was raised in working class in the 60s, I feel validation because, they're paying me money. What I'm doing is worthwhile.
Yeah.
It's not just some wasteful hobby. That's my psychology and how I was raised and grown up. How about you folks? If I can throw the question back to you.
Yeah, well,
how do you...
I kind of certainly know what you mean around, trying to marry the interests that you have with trying to make, maybe not a living, but certainly a few pound out of it, and definitely feeling validated. I mean, it's the same thing if you're a musician and you make a few pounds out of it, you think, great, like I went to university in England, and some of the English are mad for the Ceilidh music and the Irish music, and I just be in the pub, a couple of nights of the week playing music in a session anyway with a lot of our mates, and then we would start to get people coming in and saying, could you play this wedding, or my kid's got a birthday, could you come round, the three of you, and play a gig or whatever? And it was like, well, yeah, we're not a band, but if we could try it. And I still remember the first time kind of getting paid in both beer and money to play music, and just thinking, this is bloody great, So if you can make it work, that's a great feeling.
Oh, you've got to start somewhere. Here's a random story. I went to university, met a female role player who was very serious all the time, but her parents were from Merseyside.
Right.
And they hired some friends. She went to a friend's 17th birthday party in about 59. And they'd hire this local band. You may have heard of them. They were called the Quarrymen.
Yeah.
To most people, they better known the name they changed to in 1962, the Beatles. So everyone starts doing high school gigs,
Yeah.
beer and a bit of money. They go from there. So yeah, sorry, random story. I'm full of them. Well, my wife says I'm always full of it.
Well, it's not so random. I mean, it's on point. As you were asking, how we feel about the money aspect and everything, and yeah, entertainment. This is the entertainment industry. This is a growing segment of the entertainment industry, and entertainment is an important psychological need for individuals and a sociological need for society. So this is, I mean, that's what bards were. The minstrels, the skalds. So here's a quick random story. When I was in college and in my 20s, twice for the month of Christmas break, from like middle of December when December finals were over to mid-January when college started again, I lived for a month paying for my room and board by DMing every day. So there was one year, I think it was my college freshman year, and I was kind of on the outs with my parents, and I didn't really want to go home to them for the month break. And so I was in my dorm room, and the dorm was going to close in an hour. In 1 hour, the dorm room was going to close. The dorm was going to close, and they were going to put me out. I did not have a plan. One of my friends came by. He was a friend who lived off campus. He wasn't actually even in college. This was the community that had the game shop's basement, where there were the townies, the college people, and the Whiteman Air Force base military people. So he just came by the dorm, say bye to all his friends that were leaving for Christmas. And he says, "What are you going to do for Christmas, John?" I'm like, "I have no idea. They're going to close the dorm in an hour. I don't know where I'm going to go." And he says, "I will." And he was an excellent cook. Like, he was known in our group of friends for being a really good cook. So he says, "I will cook for you every day and let you sleep on my couch if you'll DM for me every day." Deal.
Yeah.
and so,
oh well,
so
there you go.
And then a couple years later, when I was a junior in college, somebody heard the story that I just told just now, and they said, "Would you do that with me this year?" So it happened twice.
Pretty good.
So, well done.
So I have actually DM'd for room and board before, for like a month at a time.
Nice.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even think about that. No, I have been professional DM before. I just didn't put that in the context of Game Shop's Basement now in 2021 and 2022.
That's a big cultural change. I mean, when I used to run a club here in Perth that was mainly centered on role playing, the question would come, how do we attract more DMs? Perhaps we should pay them. And people would go, why? I mean, they would pay to go and see a band. They would expect to pay a band something for showing up at a party or entertaining them. But it's like, it was just such a foreign concept that you should pay a games master, because surely it's a hobby. They're just doing it for love, right? To entertain us. And it's like, no. Yes, I see your point. I have to eat. It would be nice if I'm going to spend time and deploy my 30 years of experience and skills, that we all have a good time and I can eat afterwards. But that's only a new thing here.
Right, and maybe it started that. Yeah, maybe it started that way, but we're over 40 years into D&D now, and it's changed. It's become more.
Yes.
No. Maybe it did start that way. I think it did, but it's not that way anymore.
Yes, it's not Stranger Things. Well, it is, but it's not 11-year-olds entertaining themselves going, well, between confronting Cthulhian beasts and occult stuff, let's just play some games and slaughter some trolls. But
yeah,
anyway.
well, I did the math. I did the math, and the first season of Stranger Things takes place in 1983, and I was one grade behind those kids. So, like, if Stranger Things was real, then I would have been in the next grade down from them. So yeah, so that was my time period.
Amazing. So, well, what other games do you do? We've just been talking about D&D.
Well, actually, that leads us into the next question we had for you here, which
Yeah.
is what games do you mentioned Traveler, and then you also mentioned later, I noticed that
Yes.
it wasn't totally your thing, but what non-D&D games do you have experience with, and why do you like or dislike them?
Well, basically, I tried a lot of games that were popular because a small clique that played at the store. Not all of them I got to. Like, I've never been a big comic book fan, so I really, really do not get Marvel. I haven't even watched all the Marvel universe. The Marvel superhero system is really, really good and dynamic. Roll D%. If you roll badly, spend karma to influence your roll. Wonderful. Gets over the I keep rolling poorly, even though I've got amazing stats and what's after amazing? Monstrous powers. It should be a monstrous roll. I'll go and roll 5 again. The funny thing, of course, is when you have to spend karma to stop bad results. Quick story. If you remember the Marvel maps, John, there was one for Federal Building on, a big triangular Federal Building near a park. We fought some Sentinels out the front of it, and one overloaded, and we realised, wow, it's overloading. What's it going to do? It's going to do this monstrous explosion. And we looked, and it's right next to this Federal Building with its excellent glass facade and remarkable structure with all these people standing in the window. I went, oh, God, no. So we spent 100 karma just so that the explosion was downgraded to it rattled some glass. Oh, God, that was funny. Because in Marvel, if you accidentally kill people, property is struck. Well, if you destroy property accidentally, you lost karma. If you killed people, wow, and there are several hundred people there, goodbye karma pool, goodbye reputation, hello an FBI investigation. So,
Yep.
Marvel was fun, even though I didn't get the comics. I guess I started early on liking science fiction and science fantasy. Not hard science fiction, space operas like Traveller, God. And that's the unfortunate thing I would notice about the gaming hobby. Those games have died off. It's now down to people want fantasy, therefore that's all there is. Sure, there's things like Starfinder, but that really is Pathfinder in space.
Yeah.
It's more fantasy with a science background. It's still okay. 40K, despite the grim darkness, I like. Because yes, it's grim and dark, but I play and run it deliberately with black humour, because otherwise you might as well role-play being a Russian living between 1920 and 1950 to keep going about how depressed you are, how long you can survive before they just put a gun to your head and blow you away. So it's the black humour that helps.
Well, you know what Stalin said about dark humor? Stalin said that dark humor is like food. Not everybody gets it.
Very true. Very true. So yeah, I've tried a few other games. I'm finding I like the FFG games. Now, a lot of people complain and go, oh, it's got strange dice. This is a marketing gimmick. Oh, it takes a while to get used to. Oh, this is ridiculous. When I started, here's what games used. D6s. D10s existed. Percentile dice might have existed in maths classes. None of the other dice did, although they technically existed. So how did TSR, as it then was, also known as Tactical Simulations Research, or as we called it in Australia, they sue regularly, make money? They made money with crappy rules that people wanted to play, which was called original D&D. They didn't put out the box sets. Oh, and they sold you packets of D8, D20, D12, D10, D4s, which you could not otherwise get. In other words, they made their money by selling funny dice. So to me, the complaint about, oh, the FFG stuff uses funny dice is, no, it's typical. And now you can get apps with it, so it's no problem. So I played their Star Wars game, which I liked. not enough of the Star Wars game did I play. I played Legend of the Five Rings. I think their version I found the best, although being them, it's got through a certain stage in the product cycle, so they've siphoned up that entire line. I still think it's a good game. I think it's a bit pretentious. The problem is it doesn't suit D&D fans because, see, this is my view. As I was explaining to my fellow GMs today, you have to understand that D&D today, if it came out again, would not be called a roleplay game. It would be called a skirmish war game. Because you'd have your war band, they would go around create narrative quests, not native ones. They would be umpired or games mastered for narrative things, and you'd have proper scales, and it would just be that. What made it different was it was 50 years ago nearly, and people said, well, it's called a role-playing game. There's no real systems other than combat. So we'll have to improvise and tell stories and do interaction. Even today, I would argue D&D is basically still the same. It has no systems for social interaction. Sure, you've got your action rolls. Sure, you've got the skills, but try running it. I have to stop combat at initiative points when people want to talk because it's useless trying to do talking with initiative because the whole thing is actually still geared to be a war game. Now, things like L5R and others have social systems, but guess what? The average role player having been raised in D&D, if he doesn't like it, goes, social things, politics, diplomacy, I have to meet social expectations, and since it's set in East Asia, shame and face is important. Oh, God, no, give me a sword, I'm going to charge an Oni.
Well, so I noticed all the way back in the 80s and 90s in the real physical game shop's basement that a lot of people are expressing their fantasy for freedom. And so I noticed that like the most popular alignment in the game is chaotic neutral. And the reason for that is because people interpret chaotic neutral to mean I can do anything I want, and I don't even have to think about good and evil and law and chaos. And I noticed that there were some people who would really passionately want to role play a paladin back in the days when paladins had to be lawful good, or they would want to be a cleric of a strict church hierarchy. Like nobody seemed to want, or even when we did Asian themed adventures, nobody wanted to be the samurai because but the thing is, the people who really did want to be a samurai or a paladin or a cleric of a very strict church, those people were very passionate players. But the thing is, your character fit into a larger hierarchy in the world because there were NPCs over your character that you could be held accountable to. If you were a knight or a paladin, you were held accountable to your knightly order. If you were a cleric of a strict church, you were accountable to your church hierarchy. If you were a samurai, you were accountable to your daimyo. And so, since that didn't fit most people's idea of fantasy, they want to be free, woo, loose, wild. There's like, why would I want to be beholden to a boss? Because I'm beholden to a boss in real life. Like the military guys from Whiteman Air Force Base. It's like, well, I'm beholden to a command structure in real life. Why would I want to do that for my character in a fantasy game, or even just for common workers or students or whatever? It's like, I have a boss at my job in real life. Why would I want to have a boss for my fantasy character? So I hear what you're saying about the lack of formal social structure, but from what I've seen over the years, I think it also has a lot to do with they want characters that are fast and loose. Like why would I be a knight and be beholden to a knightly order when I can just be a mercenary fighter? And do I want to take this job or not? Is there enough money or not? And so I think there's that aspect too, that now there were characters that gravitated towards being the devout paladin or knight or cleric or samurai or something like that. But most characters are like, oh no, I'm just a fighter, or I'm just a generic magic user, or I'm a rogue, and they'd want to be the freelance rogue. They wouldn't want to be a rogue that was part of a larger organized thieves guild. know, because again, the people didn't seem to ever want. I noticed as a very young kid, like a teenager and 20 something in college, I noticed that when people were expressing their fantasies, they didn't want to be part of a hierarchy that had somebody over them. You know, people. I think a lot of people's fantasy is to be free of accountability.
I think you're right. Other games I tried, for instance, that was very prevalent. Like I tried being a captain in a Star Trek crew using the old FASA rules, and people just wouldn't fit. How did you also note here Shadowrun and Cyberpunk? Played them both, enjoyed them. No one is a corporate. Now here's the thing. Our grandparents, I mean, mine were born in 12 and 16, right? They would have said, having gone through the Depression, that it was tough. Get a government or secure job. That is the absolute main thing. But boomers, X, whatever, it's like, there's no security in the job. I should be free. So when they want to play Cyberpunk Street Ops because they have freedom to choose and control. Same with Shadowrun. Whereas in reality, in that world, most people go, frick, give me a corporate job. Yes, make me a drone. I live in an arcology. I'm paid for. I'm looked after. Living on the street gets you killed. But people don't think that way. They just think autonomy. It even happens in LARP. I've seen an entire LARP fail because no one would take responsibility. They wanted the games masters to solve all the problem because the games masters had set up NPCs that were bad managers of the colony that we were playing in. No one would pay tax, but they miraculously wanted the town walls completely rebuilt. They wanted all these things, but no one would pay tax. And it occurred to me, what we've got here is an entire colony of people just want to be D&D murder hobos. But they say they want to live in a LARP community and experience camping and play for 2 days in a LARP set in a Viking-style environment. It's like, does the modern person really get community? Or are we all so individual? And I agree with you. If the story is about the players, they've got to have agency. So they've got to have individuality. Because the normal person will just pick the most secure thing they can and hold on to it. Because it could be the means of reality, exit, survival, or death. But that's not fun being a player character. So, right. Shadowrun Cyberpunk, Street Ops. What else have I played, FFG? I've played a few things. There's a lot less variety now. I mean, basically, there is no science fiction thing like Traveller anymore because Traveller's fragmented into 5 different sub-brands and there is no replacement game. 40k Wrath and Glory is very interesting, but it's a science fantasy game. So is Starfinder. Basically, these days, you've got to have the word fantasy in your name. I don't know if you remember, John, but there used to be things like James Bond, the role-play game, and Spycraft, and also, what was the old one I used to play?
Star Frontiers?
Yeah, things like that, were espionage or other things.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't got the word fantasy in, so they're not offered anymore. And that's a pity. I think that's the biggest challenge with D&D. People go on to play other games. Like, we played it because, here's an interesting perspective for you, our friend in Ireland. The first roleplay game was D&D. It came out. The rules were so bad that when a guy by the name of Kenson Andre, I think he was living in Philadelphia, got them. 2 weeks later, he said, well, this is a good idea, but shite execution. And he created the second game, Tunnels and Trolls, that weekend. So, yes, D&D was the only thing, and there was a lot put out, but people said it's a good idea, poorly executed. And they went with Traveller, and they went with World War II, and they went with a lot of clones, and it was a crazy design space. But what we've got now is, again, it's a bit like magic. originally D&D didn't crowd out other competitors. Magic has crowded out all other trading card game competitors after a while. They might have niches, but they'll die. D&D 5th is sort of like that now. Everything has to be fantasy because D&D 5th is, and it's hard to get people into other games. And if you do, you've got to get them passionate about it because they'll go, it's not D&D, and they just want to play D&D. At, for instance, a game store I go to now in a place called Midland, which is on the eastern districts of our city. Their games are basically D&D. They're always getting new players. They're getting returning players, but they all just know D&D and want to play D&D. So we have dedicated people who are into Pathfinder, Starfinder, Cyberpunk Red. They can barely get a game going because all people know is D&D.
Yeah.
All people
And
have time for now is D&D.
I don't see that getting better anytime soon because I believe, and now I love D&D, okay? Like it's been in my life for 39 years. I'm making my business with it and everything right now. What I observe here, though, is that D&DBeyond.com has basically put a stranglehold on behalf of D&D against everything else because there is a real prevalent attitude that if it's not on D&D Beyond, it doesn't exist. And no other game system, I don't think, is going to have the resources or the money or the finances to create a website like D&D Beyond for itself. And even within D&D, try to get people to kind of expand beyond just the official Wizards of the Coast products because there's lots and lots and lots of really neat things that are not official Wizards of the Coast, but those things are not on D&D Beyond. So like at gameshopsbasement.com on our website, I have this link that I call it the big list of character classes, and I put big in all capital letters, BIG, and there's a spreadsheet there that shows all of the character classes that I support at my table. And there's like over 450 entries. And I even put like the names of, but very few people are willing to play something that's not supported by D&D Beyond because it's too much work, end quote. So like there's a few people like Owen is a gentleman in Rory's group that's going to play tonight, and he plays an arcane physician wizard. That's not arcane physician. The whole idea is that you've basically sacrificed your specialization so that you can have some cleric spells and be kind of a healer for a party that may not have a real cleric.
Yep.
But it's build theory. You know, it's cost, it's opportunity cost because other mages may feel in their build theory that they want to be the evoker, they want to be the war mage, or they want to do one of these other specializations. You know, what he's done in lieu of a regular specialization is he's become the arcane physician. There's another gentleman who plays on Sunday nights. He's something from Mystara called a Reaver Barbarian. That's in the Mystara Player's Guide. There's a young lady who plays on Wednesday afternoons, and she's got a character that's a toy maker artificer. Now that's fun. But not every third-party product is good. Okay, we could do a whole discussion about third-party products and what I think are good ones versus bad ones. But what we're talking about here is the stranglehold that D&D Beyond has on things. So even within D&D, they don't want to play something that's not in an official Wizards of the Coast book because they don't want to work. That's too much work to play something that's not on D&D Beyond.
It's an interesting thing you brought up there, Murray. And it's kind of a good thing that we had the discussion about your history and how you got into gaming because it ties in with it. And I was having this discussion with somebody yesterday about music and the kind of the death of good popular or commercial music. That if you look at the 60s or 70s, you were talking about the Beatles. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, we had music on the radio that was actually brilliant. It was like, really inventive in terms of the musicianship. Beautiful poetic lyrics that would make you think or feel or even bring a tear to a man's eye. And now if you put on the radio, it's horrible. It's auto-tuned, automated. The lyrics aren't worth even trying to figure out what people are saying. and I think that's because money men, men in suits got into it and decided, well, is there a way we can increase the profit margin here? We don't really care if we actually destroy the industry that we're in because we just want to extract a load of money out of it. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily 100% true with the D&D things. I'm not sure, but even I grew up playing PC games in the 90s, and that was like a really innovative time for PC gaming when there was a lot of new technology and people were kind of pushing boundaries that would change again and again and again. You're talking about different games and game systems that you play that don't effectively exist anymore because people don't play them and there's no company putting new stuff out. I mean, there's genres of games that I grew up playing that no longer exist anymore because they were it's hard to kind of put this without insulting people, but because the mass of people who play games now want kind of very simple to understand, easy to engage with kind of games, they don't really want to have to think or be too challenged by games. Games that did that primarily don't exist anymore because the developers or the publishers don't think they're worth investing in or putting any money into, because they're not going to get as big of a return on profit as the kind of mass market, easy to digest stuff. So I think that happens with all entertainment, unfortunately.
I think you're right. But see, it's interesting to hear your perspectives, guys, because, for instance, back in the 90s, we would have played here in Perth Battletech RPG. We would have played a game called Mutant Chronicles. Now, if you've ever heard of it, it is actually the alternate to the Warhammer 40k mythos. It's a diesel punk game set in the far future in the solar system. Same ideas, but it was an alternative. We would also played more World of Darkness tabletop, and we still would have played Call of Cthulhu. Well, people still do Call of Cthulhu. Perth being so small, when interest died in the first few things I mentioned, even though those books are back on the shelf, no game to start because the people interested now have changed, or in their 30s, have 40s, have kids, have lives and have moved on, and the books are expensive. D&D, however, is easy to get into because of the interconnectivity of the internet. Now, I've always thought there are games in America that are far more popular and far more played more in America, like Rifts, than there have been here in Australia or even in Perth. Like, I understand RuneQuest is still a thing, and so is Rifts in North America, but it's not here because of generational change, because we're isolated, and because, and John's hit it on the head, there is no D&D Beyond equivalent. Or even GURPS. GURPS is a better example. GURPS has completely died off. I've not been in a GURPS game this century in Perth. But in America, apparently it still goes. Steve Jackson Games still produces it. So it's hard for me to get a perspective on that, which is why it's good that I've met John, who lives in, well, I wouldn't call it, do you call it Middle America, St. Louis? Because the Mississippi is the heart of the nation.
You know, I do, but not everybody agrees with my analysis of things. You know, for a few years, so St. Louis is a bi-state area. It's right there on the river between Missouri and Illinois. There's a Missouri side to it. There's an Illinois side to it. And the train system here is called the Metrolink. And it goes from Scott Air Force Base in Illinois all the way to the St. Louis Airport in Missouri. And I moved to Illinois side for a couple of years, and I heard some people over there, and I heard some radio and TV commercials refer to it as Metro East. And so I came back over here to the Missouri side and talked to my friends, and I said, yeah, I'm in Metro East now. And they were like, oh no, that's not a thing. No, St. Louis is the Missouri side only over here. Those Illinois people, they just wish they were part of St. Louis. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure it's a bi-state area. They're like, oh, no, it's not a bi-state area. And I had uncovered this snobbery that I did not know that this snobbery existed. Yeah. You know, I thought that I'm pretty sure it's a Metrolink train system, and it goes all the way from Scott Air Force Base over there to St. Louis Airport over here. Oh, no, Illinois just wishes it was part of St. Louis. And yeah, so people don't always agree with my analysis of things.
But it's still the gateway to the west. The arch is still there and will be there in Rifts. I think
Yep.
it's important, isn't it?
Yes, it's a permanent rift in Rifts. It's not a rift that just sort of opens sometimes. No,
Yep.
and of course you mentioned Call of Cthulhu. There's a lot of Lovecraftian themes in Rifts. In the Rifts mythos, basically, in history, the St. Louis Arch was planned by cultists, and so when and if enough magic would return to the world one day, like it has in Rifts, the St. Louis Arch would open up to a horrible dimension of cosmic horror. So,
Oh my God! Who built the
yeah,
Denver airport thing?
so in the Rifts timeline of the Rifts role playing game, that was planned.
Yeah. So, are there more things still played in Middle America, or are you guys lamenting? Well, there are all these great games, and they've now died off. What's it like? Because again, I live in a very small town, a city, and once it stops, it doesn't start again.
It is still predominantly D&D like it's always been. I just think that, like you're saying, and because of dndbeyond.com and everything, it's like if there was a pie graph and the majority of the graph has always been D&D and other games was a little sliver on the graph, I think that sliver is getting smaller. So I think that it's still, you walk into a game store, see 10 tables, chances are 9 or 10 of them, 9 of them or all 10 of them are going to be D&D at any given moment. Once in a while, you might see another game. It's pretty much how it's always been for me growing up and being in gaming. But I think now that the little bit of people that play other than D&D is getting even smaller. I compare it to coffee. Like there's a difference between the people that go to Starbucks and order some fancy thing, because they're a coffee connoisseur, and somebody else who is just basically walking into McDonald's, rolling up their sleeve for an IV injection, saying caffeine black now. So,
Yes.
that person that just needs caffeine black now from McDonald's, compared to the connoisseur. And so basically D&D is the gateway, pretty much always been the gateway. And so the idea, when somebody has been kind of an advanced gamer, a veteran gamer, then they kind of notice that, oh, there are other games. You mean I could play a Marvel superhero? I could play a DC superhero? I could play a Jedi or a Sith in Star Wars, or a bounty hunter or a Mandalorian. Once they realize that there are other franchises than D&D, that you could play comic books or sci-fi, science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, whatever. Once they realize that there are other things, that's more, because most people, D&D is getting more new people than ever each year for the past several years. And when I talk to people for Game Shop's Basement and meet new people all the time on Discord, if I made a pie graph of that, somewhere between half and 2/3 of that pie graph would be people who are either totally new. The Game Shop's Basement, the physical one, when I was a kid, we used to call them virgins, totally new, or maybe they've played a few times, but they haven't been able to connect, like you were talking about earlier in the interview, to find their group, find a steady group. And so, but most people, somewhere between half and 2/3, have either never played at all, they're looking for their first game, or they've played a little bit and they're looking for their first group. So there's so many new people coming in, and those people are just, caffeine black now. Whereas later on, it's more of an advanced thing to realize, oh, there's other games I could try. And people do eventually reach that stage where they realize there's other games they could try, and then they try, and then they decide to either come back to D&D, decide other games aren't something they're interested in, or they go explore some other games. So I see it as an kind of an advanced connoisseur thing. Like when somebody's been in it for a while, then they'll be like, I wonder what another game would be like. Well, we had one left for you, that one pre-written one. I mean, of course, now that we've got you, we could ask anything we want, but we don't do shock jockism here on, at Basement Banter. But we got one pre-written question left for you. And there's, a lot of GMs are stuck being the DM too much, and they don't get to play enough. How's that been for you? Have you had the support of other people DMing enough for you to get your player fix, or are you one of those people that gets stuck being the DM all the time?
I don't get stuck being the DM all the time. The truth be told, the reason I prefer to GM is that at times people find me a lousy player because I'm too directive and pushy. And I go, no, that's good role playing, you arguing for block of cheese, but we need to get the mission done. So, and it is. Sometimes it's the funniest thing and it was worth the night just to see a good bit of funny role play. But other times, like, no, guys, we need to get a move on. So people would rather I GM for that reason because I can be too pushy a player. But I find you need to play. Because you can learn so many things by playing. But also you can learn so many things by playing or games mastering new people. It's like I didn't realise, because I'm a legacy player, I started, with box set, that in their attempt to simplify 3-5 into 5, they omitted crucial words that actually told you how a monk works. Because John and I would know, monks open hands attacks count as weapons, because that's where we're in 3-5. No, it doesn't actually say that in 5. In 5, it says you are proficient of unarmed strikes, but, and then it goes on to explain if you're a monk, you get these other things, but it never calls the monks' attacks melee weapon attacks. So it's had to be a convention developed. If you hadn't, like us, gone from 3 or 3-5 and just called it that, new players and GMs are confronted with, so what are monk attacks? Does that mean I can use certain powers? Because it says melee weapon attack. But it doesn't say my unarmed strikes melee weapon attacks. No, because they removed that verbiage to simplify. But I didn't realise that until a brand new player pointed that out to me and she said, I'll be a monk to start with. How does this work? I had to read. So, yeah, I'd encourage GMs to go and play with other GMs just to enjoy themselves. But also, whether you play or run with some brand new people occasionally, because you've probably found you fall into assumptions about how the rules worked. And a good example of this is actually from wargaming. The worst you can do in 40K, if you join competitive tournaments, now it's your first mistake. Your second mistake is if you just play with 3 or 4 people, because then you'll fall into patterns of play and accepted rules which aren't actually correct and objectively stink. So, yeah, playing, you're right. Playing is necessary. I find I'm getting my fix now from games mastering, but I've still got to play. In fact, I've got to play things that aren't D&D. Occasionally. How do you find it, John?
Well, I prefer to DM. If I had to pick one and could only do one for the rest of my life, I'd pick DMing. But if I never play, that's kind of like the Jack Nicholson character from The Shining. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Playing is important. That is a different kind of enjoyment, and I crave that as well. So when I do get the chance to play, I really, really relish it. And there's 2 kinds of experiences where I play. One is where I play because I'm investing in a young DM. We want to make like what we used to do in the game shop's basement, physical one in the 80s and 90s, was we collectively would decide on purpose that we were going to help a new DM. And so we would actually try to be the player group that would be like the training wheels player group to help that DM get better. Because the more DMs, the more good DMs that are out there, the better it is for all of us. And so that one style of play is where I'm investing in a new DM, trying to help them get confidence and get better. But the other kind of play is where I sit down with a DM that I appreciate is like, and it's going to sound arrogant. I can't help it that it's going to sound arrogant, but where I sit down with a DM that's like on my level of experience.
Yes.
You know, somebody that I respect as a DM, and sit down and actually get to have them wow me the way that I wow other people. You know, like I've seen on camera, I've seen Rory tell stories about, yeah, when we played this game with John, and I've seen that little smile light up on his face. And so for me to actually sit down and get that from somebody else, you know, so like my when my elves are dashing around, you know, doing all that crazy stuff and every, you know, so yeah, playing is a different enjoyment than DMing. But there's two ways that I could sit down at a table. I could sit down at a table purely for just the gratification of like, oh, I get to play for once, you know, and this is going to be woo, you know.
Yeah.
Or I could sit down, you know, more in teacher mode. I could sit down because, okay, this is a young DM. They need help. I want to be part of what helps them be a good DM. And that was something that we consciously did back in the day. You know, we would actually have little meetings at the table before the DM showed up. How's the DM doing? You know, what do we need to do to help this person get better? You know, and that's magic when players support the DM like that.
See, we never did. It was all learn yourself. So that
Yep.
I'm glad that you were part of that environment, because that's the right environment to be in. Very good.
How
go on.
do you guys feel like, because when me and the missus and my mate Owen decided, like, oh, we should try and find a DM and play it, because we didn't want to have to learn it ourselves. We kind of just wanted to enjoy it. And I thought at that point, like, preconceived notions or whatever, like, who would really want to DM for fun? Because it seems like an awful lot of work. It seems like you're having to do something that is kind of akin to work. Whereas for me to crack open a beer with my mates on the other side of the table, and kind of, certainly once you become comfortable with the character, I'm not having to do too much thinking. I'm just kind of there enjoying the story the way you do with a good book or a good movie. And it felt very, like, it feels very relaxed to me to play, certainly with my mates, because I'm comfortable around them already. So it's just like, it's a guaranteed good time, if you know what I mean. Like, I know what it's going to be like before I go in. Now that I've got a bit more into the game, I can see that being a DM gives you the chance to tell a story and to create characters, and that appeals to me also as somebody who likes telling stories and jokes in real life anyway. But it does still seem like it would take a lot more cognitive processing. I'd have to be a lot more caffeinated and alert rather than relaxed with a beer in my hand. You know.
Do you know what the secret is? There are several secrets. There's knowing why you're doing something. Then if you stick to that why, you can always answer, why the hell am I doing this? You can answer that, you can keep going. 2, your games rely on the goodwill of the players and their buy-in. If folks just sit on the outside table like they would do in the old days and want to be entertained, it's an energy vampire on the other side of the table from you, and you get drained. I didn't appreciate this, funnily enough, till I went to live action role play. Camarilla, which had a bad name. But what I found there was, the idea of creating a character is everyone was expected to take part in collectively with the storyteller to tell the story. Collective storytelling was stressed, and you made your character with the GM. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because that meant you would get over the feeling that, am I just entertaining you? You don't seem to be engaging. I seem to be doing all the work. No, this is wrong. The correct standard is it's collective storytelling. You all work together. It's one reason I help people design their characters, so I know what their character does, and I can give them reasonable expectations, and they get buy-in. Because what you do as a GM is you prepare, but sometimes you slip up. But as long as you don't spend or waste the goodwill of your players, they'll help you. But you're right, that's the worst possible situation. We have no real goodwill of your players, and they're just sitting at the outside table going, I'm not actually going to do anything. You do stuff and entertain me. How do you find it, John? Is it just me and my personality?
No.
Or
That definitely happens. No, yeah, no two tables are the same. No two groups are the same, and that definitely happens. You have and I've actually this isn't the first time that we've had a conversation like this, and you tossed around the word energy vampire, and I've kind of stolen it from you because I use it now when I talk about that kind of play or that style of play. So, with credit to Murray for bringing it into my lexicon in that way first. Yeah, there are energy vampire groups definitely, and energy vampire style of players, um, and it is draining, you know, and um, I'm not going to name names or anything because it's not that kind of thing. I just want to discuss that in theory that it exists. That I DM professionally now because people pay me to. That should be the dream. That should be the dream where wow, this is so cool. I just got paid for that. But sometimes there are some tables where it really does feel like work. I'll grab my comfort food, which in my case is like a soda. And of course, sodas make me fat at my age because my metabolism isn't what it was. But I'll just be sucking on the comfort food and just trying to get through it, and and trying not to make it sound in my voice like I'm trying to get through it. And yeah, I mean that can happen, but tables sort themselves out, and there's only 24 hours in a day. There's only so many tables I can DM, and so I'm sort of gravitating towards the better groups because why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, but groups can make themselves better. It's explaining. See, I'm working now on the theory that if you explain to people what's expected, they have standards to follow. And they know what's expected of them. And the ones that respond, you can build rapport and relationship with. I mean, it's not deep relationship, but it's not transactional either. And that's the difference. If people hire you to entertain them, it's a transaction. The richer ones in groups is when you develop relationships with people you've met through stores, and you can put up their quirks, but they give you goodwill, and that you can share a beer with them or a Coke or a pizza while you're gaming, and whatever, they invest, and that just happens. But if you encourage a group that's the standard, that's what that cuts down, and people going, oh, I'm paying you, I'll do what I want or not. And it's like, yeah, okay, dude, but no.
Right, or the thought that occurs to me in those moments with really good groups like that is like if they lived in my town and I had time for a private game. I don't right now. My private table is not a thing anymore. But if like the olden days I was running my private table once a week, if people lived in my town and I had my private table, yeah, I'd be inviting this person over. It's like that's what those are good feelings. It's like, yeah, I'd love to have those people at my private table at my house. That's when it really feels good. Yeah.
All right, so we've been gossiping for a while, being old warhounds, groganards, whatever you want to call us. You can't call us beardy. You're a beardy, and we're clean shaven. We've already subverted a dominant gamer paradigm. I'll ask the last question. John,
go ahead.
What was the best or most recent good experience you had as a games master that you can share with us?
Well, just last night. Last night we were doing Shadowrun. So instead of searching through all the years of my memories to find the absolute best story, I'll just talk about last night. Okay, so last night, we were doing Shadowrun, and in the world of Shadowrun, a little bit of background to understand the story. There are everybody has an SIN, a system identification number, which is like a social security number or a national ID number in real life in real countries we have today in 2022. In the Shadowrun Dark Future, everybody has a system identification number, and of course, Shadowrunners, like you mentioned with Cyberpunk and stuff like that, they're not corporate people. They're people that live quasi-legally, is the phrase in universe. And so they don't have the system identification numbers that they were born with. So they don't, they have fake identities and stuff like that. So in the slang, since it's a SIN, system identification number, they refer to people universe, the slang is that if you're a legitimate legal person and you are operating under the identity that you were born with, and the government's keeping proper track of you and everything, they call you a sinner. SIN, because it's a system identification number. You're a sinner.
That's right.
Sinner. And then someone who is not using the system identification number that they were born with, and the government is not tracking them the way the government would like to track them, then those people are sinless. But so the
which is ironic.
So what happens sometimes in Shadowrun is or Cyberpunk is that a player character could either start out sinless, they could come into their very first session already part of the underworld, or they could be somebody who is falling out of the sinner world. They could start their first session as somebody who has a real job and a real identity, and then events can happen in that first story arc that just pulls them into the shadows. And so there was so that's the background. But what was happening last night is there's a young gentleman. I don't know his age. I don't ask his age, but he sounds on the Discord like a teenager, and it's kind of fun to play with young people sometimes. And everybody else at the game's an adult. His character's a gnome. In Shadowrun, gnomes are a little subrace of dwarves. So this gnome has a pretty legit identity, and he's very wealthy and very rich, and he's being pulled into his first story. He's being pulled into his first Shadowrun story, and party is just they stole they stole this van off the street just by random chance. It happened to be the van of some drug mules that had drugs all over it, and the party they began get through security in places. They started using this gnome's ID and everything. He will not have a job. Like when the repercussions of what's he is basically, and they used some of the drugs from the van to bribe some security guards, and basically the kid was having, in character, he was having a meltdown, but it was a funny comedic role-played meltdown. He's like, I'm not a drug dealer. I'm not a drug dealer. It's like, oh, my boss is gonna kill me. And so he was actually, and so everybody, all the adults at the table, their characters were like, character pats you on the back and tells you they're there, it'll be all right. My character hands you a beer, tells you it'll be, and so basically they were role playing as the seasoned Shadowrunners that are already part of the underworld and already, sinless, already living in that quasi legal Shadowrun status. They were basically, pulling this poor gnome into their illegal dealings and stuff. It was and the way it's kind of a you had to be there thing, but I was laughing my butt off. I had to get control just so I could DM, because I was laughing so hard at all they were making jokes and innuendos and puns, and they were just giving this poor kid hell, and he was handling it and the way he was handling it was funny too. So it was definitely one of those. Good. I mean, unfortunately, with a lot of gamer stories, she had to be there, but I really had a blast last night. That was a fun game.
Cool. Well, bizarrely enough, my computer failed, so I'm actually phoning this in, and apparently I've just got a message that my battery power is down to 15%. Is that good? No, probably not.
It's good that we have time to sign off properly.
Yes.
All right. So very quickly, my story happened 4 hours ago, yesterday, because it's now after midnight here. I ran a DM's Academy because I wanted to find out if I could foster some new GMs in my local community. So we're going to do world building exercises, right? And also basically expand GM craft. So we're talking philosophy. Now, 3 of the attendees, 2 write and 1 runs for the family. Now, I'm not going to go into it, but essentially they've had a lot of problems. I mean, life has just whacked everyone in that family for baseball bat. So they're very quiet, very reticent. They're socially nervous anyway. And they started off slow, but as we got on, they all got engaged and their spirits rose and everything. And what I didn't realise was they had come to that store on Wednesday, taken part in a group, but the group had failed. So, of course, they're taking on, was it our difficulties and our, our challenges that meant the group failed? Should we feel bad about it? Will the store owner be upset because that's put a group out of business? I didn't know any of this. So just by going through and involving them in discussions and talking GMing and what we can do in this world building thing, it rose their spirit so much that when the husband came to pick them up, and he is like them, very shy, reclusive. He basically said more than 4 words to me. He came up to me and said, "Wow, it was good to see my wife is now energized and active and talking. That must have been a really good session." And it's like, you have a dim idea as a GM that what you want to do in any social relationship is add value to people. And it's like, I walked away thinking I wasn't even trying there, but I added enough value to these people, their morale rose. And he was telling me Lisa his wife was on the verge of not coming back to the store after the group failure. So I'm not a genius. But just by doing my job and talking about GMing and sharing the passions and involving people, I was able, to me, I'm still surprised about, I was able to add enough value to people so they didn't retreat into isolation, which is my pet peeve. I don't like the idea of people becoming isolated because bad things happen when you isolate yourselves. I'm not going to go into it, but it's one reason I run games on the web or in face-to-face, so people aren't isolated. So I'm absolutely chuffed about that, to use an expression of the losing English cricket team. Sorry, as an Australian, we love wiping out, wiping England's nose. It's the pretentious country of over 50 million or more, which we keep putting to the sword with only 25 million people. The only other bigger joy we have is beating Ireland in the horrible hybrid thing they call international rules football.
Yeah.
But that's another story that Rory and I can share at some stage. But anyway, thanks for the opportunity to meet with you. That 20-minute conversation hopefully will be edited down to 20 minutes from the 2 hours we've just done. But I'm going to bid you adieu, gentlemen, because I'm sure you've actually got things still on the race that you have to talk about. Thanks for the opportunity. I mean, do you guys have a final question or anything else you'd like to ask me? We all have to play. So remind me. We'll set up a session for the three of us. We'll show you what I actually do and stream it.
So before your battery runs out, one thing that just occurred to me, I forgot to ask, because it's something people would want to know, is obviously D&D. But so what kinds of, when people are like, well, so what is this a new DM run? What kind of games are you thinking of offering?
Right. Well, I want to give people the D&D experience. We are fans of the original world Mystara. I'm also interested in giving them a grittier D&D experience. The city I live in, being as small as it has been at times, a contact I made many years ago has actually written 5e conversion rules for Harnworld. He lives 2 suburbs away from me. So that puts me in a position to deliver a gritty but realistic medieval roleplay game. I was discussing that thing. D&D is not actually medieval. It assumes it's early modern because everyone's a free farmer. No one's a serf.
Oh,
most people know how to read and write. Okay, if you're a free man,
I never thought of that.
In 16th century England, you could learn to read. But there hasn't been universal elementary education until the 19th century. But everyone knows, unlike previous editions now, how to read and write. Even barbarians, people that were forbidden from being literate in second ed. So I'm interested in doing that. I'm also interested if people want to try things like the 40k role play, delivering that. Because sometimes you need to know what the alternatives are to appreciate even D&D. Because how do you know how good something is if you've never tried something else. You've got no basis for comparison. So that's the sort of game I'm looking at doing. It probably will be laid back. I'll tell too many stories because I like a sense of humour. It might be a bit black humour. It might be a bit work growing up. So I'm sorry, that's why I say no teams at the table, just in case I say the wrong thing. It's like,
Enough.
it's a problem we have in Australia. When you're working class, the F word becomes a common adjective, and so do a few others. And when you become educated and go to university, like I did, and like a previous Prime Minister did, you can speak properly and eloquently without speaking like you've got to stick up your ass. But, you know, when it gets stressed,
Yep.
and it becomes unrepeatable.
So before we lose your battery, and before we sign off here, the last thing that I thought of is have been some comments this week about, we might get to play with John instead of just having John be the DM. So at some point, you know, we might try to, you know, so I guess there's some interest in that about, you know, people coming to a game where I was on the player side instead of the DM side. So we can talk about that later. Just kind of a heads up.
It sounds a worthwhile project. People find out as much about seeing you play as they will you running games for them. And I need to show you guys what I do to make sure, you know, that we have a good standard and community standards and what we're trying to build here at the Game Shop Basement, which is a community. You have to have some shared standards. You know, different point of views are essential, but you've got to know that you're going to get quality. And the easiest way for you guys to find out is hit me up for a game and, we'll play. Then if we stream it, we stream it. If people want to watch you play, why not?
All right. Fair enough. Good night, Murray.
Good night, folks.
Good night. Good morning. God bless. Whichever. Have fun, guys. See you later.
Bye-bye.
I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever thought about making money for game mastering? If you have, go to GameShopsBasement.com. There's a banner ad at the top that can take you some more information about learning how to do just that. And now, on with our feature presentation.